They say working night security is an easy job, just a paycheck for watching shadows. I used to believe that. At first, the parking garage felt like any other, a concrete maze of oil stains, faded parking lines, and flickering fluorescent lights. It wasn't a bad gig, just dull. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ran till 6 a.m. 8 hours of silence, interrupted only by the occasional car rolling in or out. The shopping center was dying, and so was the traffic. Most nights, I was completely alone. I liked it that way. I sat in the security office, a cramped little booth tucked into the corner of level 1. One desk, a stiff chair, and a wall of outdated monitors cycling through grainy black and white feeds from the security cameras. The air always smelled of damp concrete and stale coffee. A radio sat clipped to my belt, ready to call dispatch in case of trouble, though there never was any. For a while, my only company was the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional flutter of pigeons roosting in the ceiling beams. I'd walk the floors, check for break-ins, and kill time watching cars rust under the dim garage lights. Easy work, boring work. But then little things started feeling off. The first time I noticed something strange, it was around midnight. I was doing my usual patrol, walking along level 3, when I saw it. A black sedan, parked in the farthest corner. I was sure it hadn't been there earlier, but maybe I missed it. I walked over, shining my flashlight through the windshield. Empty. No signs of forced entry. No reason for concern. But when I glanced at the security camera mounted on the pillar nearby, a chill ran down my spine. The red recording light was off. That was odd. The cameras ran 24/7. There was no reason for them to stop. I pulled out my radio. Dispatch, this is Rob. Camera 3A isn't recording. Can you check the system? A pause. Then a burst of static. Rob, you already called about that an hour ago. I stopped cold. I know. No, I didn't, I said, gripping the radio tighter. Silence. Then the line went dead. I looked around. The garage stretched out before me in long rows of concrete pillars, bathed in dim yellow light. No movement. No sound. But I felt it then. That creeping sensation of being watched. I turned back toward the security office, forcing myself to shake it off. Maybe dispatch had me confused with another guard. Maybe the system was just bugging out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And it was only the beginning. I always hated how quiet the garage got after midnight. Even with the occasional rumble of a distant car or the flickering hum of overhead lights, the silence pressed in like a weight. I've been working security here for 3 months, and I thought I'd gotten used to it. But that night, something felt different. I was making my usual rounds, moving through the dimly lit levels, my flashlight casting long, shifting shadows. The garage had 5 floors, most of them empty at this hour. A handful of cars sat scattered around, an old sedan on level 3, a dusty SUV on 4. I knew them by heart. People left their cars overnight sometimes, and I'd memorized which ones belonged to the regulars. That's why I stopped when I saw the black Honda on level 2. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't there when I started my shift. I was sure of it. My gut tightened as I checked my watch. It was just past 2 a.m. No one had driven in since before midnight. I would have heard the engine. I walked up to the car, shining my flashlight across the windshield. Empty. The doors were locked. The surface was cool to the touch, too cool for a car that had just been parked. I crouched to check the license plate, mentally noting the numbers. Something about it nagged at me, like a word stuck on the tip of my tongue. I turned to head back to my station, but then I heard it. A faint scrape. It came from above. I snapped my flashlight up toward the ceiling, my pulse kicking up a notch. The sound was soft, barely noticeable, like the shuffle of a shoe against concrete. But the floor above me was level 3, and I had just come from there. There was no one up there. I swallowed and reached for my radio. This is Robert, checking in, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I think we might have a trespasser in the garage. Gonna check level 3. A burst of static answered me, followed by a low, garbled noise. Then my own voice whispered back, slightly distorted. You already checked. I froze. My grip on the radio tightened. What? Static swallowed the response. The radio went dead. A slow, creeping chill spread through my chest. I forced a breath, then another. My brain scrambled for a reasonable explanation. A radio malfunction, interference from another frequency, anything. I told myself it was nothing, but my feet had already started moving. I climbed the stairs to level 3, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. My footsteps echoed too loud against the concrete. The air felt heavier up here, the kind of thick stillness that made you hold your breath without realizing it. I moved past a row of parked cars, scanning between them, checking behind the thick cement pillars. Nothing. No movement. No sign of anyone. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe I was just tired. Then I saw it. A shoe print. It was fresh, pressed into a thin layer of dust near the far wall. The shape was clear, a single footprint, but no others leading to or away from it. Just one, as if someone had stood there and vanished. A sharp clatter echoed behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering. My flashlight darted across the garage, landing on a security camera mounted on the wall. The camera had shifted. It was moving, adjusting its angle to look directly at me. My stomach turned to ice. The cameras in this garage weren't motion sensitive. They were fixed. They didn't move on their own. The red recording light flickered twice. Then the power cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. The parking garage was silent, except for the faint hum of a flickering light overhead. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete, the kind of scent that clings to old places. I took a slow walk through the lower levels, my footsteps echoing around me. It was supposed to be an easy job. Walk around, make sure no one was breaking into cars, check the cameras, and pass the time. But something had been gnawing at me for days now. Small things, little details that didn't sit right. A car parked at an angle when I could have sworn it was straight before. A coffee cup sitting on the ledge that hadn't been there on my last round. The feeling that someone was watching from just beyond the glow of the overhead lights. I sighed and pulled out my radio. Dispatch, this is Rob. All clear on level 2. Silence. A bit of static crackled. Then a voice responded. Copy that, Rob. I turned toward the security office, ready to check the monitors again, but something caught my eye. A dark smudge on the concrete floor near the exit ramp. I walked over, frowning. It was wet, and when I crouched down to touch it, a chill ran through me. It was still fresh. Not oil, not water. Something else. I glanced around, scanning the shadows between the parked cars. Was someone here? A dull ache settled at the back of my skull. I reached up to rub my temple, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I was standing somewhere else. My breath caught in my throat. I was now on level 3. I spun around, heart pounding. The hell? Had I walked up here? I looked at my watch. 4:12 a.m. That wasn't right. That couldn't be right. I was just on level 2. I checked my watch at 2:47. I had radioed in. How the hell had it jumped to after 4? I tried to breathe, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe I was just tired, zoning out. Maybe I had walked up here without realizing it. But that didn't explain the missing hour and a half. I swallowed hard and checked my radio. Still clipped to my belt. I lifted it and pressed the button. Dispatch, this is Rob. Did I check in earlier? A pause. Then the voice came through. Yeah, Rob. You called in at 3:30. Said everything was clear. I felt something cold coil in my stomach. I didn't check in at 3:30. I couldn't have. I don't remember anything between 2:47 and now. My grip on the radio tightened. All right. Okay. Thanks. I let go of the button, my hands slick with sweat. The garage suddenly felt bigger, emptier, like the walls had stretched just a little further apart. My own breath sounded too loud in my ears. I turned back toward the security office. I needed to check the cameras. I walked faster now, every step feeling heavier, my boots scuffing against the concrete. The fluorescents above me buzzed like insects. I reached the office, my fingers fumbling with the key before I finally swung the door open and sat down in front of the monitors. I scanned through the feeds. Then my stomach dropped. One of the screens, camera 4, showed me, standing in the garage, facing the camera. But I was here in the office. The figure on the screen, myself, stood completely still, head tilted slightly to the side, like it was watching. I blinked. The screen glitched, static cutting through the image for a split second. Then, when it cleared, I was gone. I pushed my chair back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I ran my hands over my face, trying to ground myself. I was just tired. It had to be a camera error. That's all. But deep down I knew something was wrong. And whatever was happening to me, it was getting worse. The parking garage was dead silent, except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights above me. I stood at the entrance of the maintenance room, my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a thin blade. The door had been slightly ajar when I found it, almost like an invitation. I hesitated before stepping inside. The air was thick, stale, carrying the scent of dust, old metal, and something faintly sour, something that didn't belong. The room was small, barely big enough to move around in, with concrete walls that seemed to close in the deeper I went. A single flickering light bulb dangled from the ceiling, its weak glow barely reaching the corners of the room. And that's when I saw it. A makeshift bed, if you could even call it that, was shoved against the far wall. Just a pile of tattered blankets and a flattened pillow, the fabric worn thin from use. Someone had been living here. Recently. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat steady but heavy. I'd seen squatters before, but this felt different. More deliberate. More calculated. A small, rusted metal desk sat against the opposite wall, covered in scattered papers, notebooks, and something that made my breath catch, surgical tools. A pair of forceps, a scalpel, and a syringe lay neatly lined up, like they were waiting to be used again. I took a careful step forward, my boots scuffing against the floor. The sound echoed too loudly. The notebooks were filled with handwritten notes, scrawled in a sharp, almost frantic script. Words and phrases jumped out at me as I flipped through the pages. Memory retention, unstable. Subject 3 exhibited increased confusion. Identity synchronization failure. Must adjust frequency. The words sent a shiver up my spine. I pushed aside some of the papers and found an old VHS tape. No label, just a strip of black plastic with a blank white sticker. My fingers hovered over it for a moment before I turned to the small television in the corner. It had a built-in VHS player, an old, dusty relic that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Still, I had to know. I slid the tape into the slot and hit play. The screen flickered, then filled with static. For a second, I thought the tape was damaged. Then, an image emerged, grainy, black and white, the camera fixed on a man sitting in a chair. He looked terrified. His head twitched slightly, as if he was trying to fight something. His mouth moved, but there was no sound at first. Then, a crackling noise, like an old radio tuning in. "No, please. I don't want to." The man jerked forward suddenly, his eyes rolling back for a moment before he went completely still. Silence. Then, after several seconds, he lifted his head again, but something was wrong. His expression had changed. His face was calm, too calm, and when he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Who am I?" The video cut to black. I yanked the tape out of the player, my breathing unsteady. Something was happening here. Something I wasn't supposed to find. And whoever had been living in this room, they weren't gone. I could feel it. Someone was still here, watching. I should have gone home. I should have walked out of that parking garage, thrown my radio into the nearest trash can, and never looked back. But I didn't. I had to know. The maintenance room on the lowest level wasn't just a place for storing tools. Someone had been living down there. I had seen the mattress pushed against the wall, the stacks of food wrappers, the scattered notes written in small, frantic handwriting. And those VHS tapes, the ones labeled with names I didn't recognize, sent a chill deep into my bones. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that the job was getting to me. Then I saw the man. It was past 3 in the morning. The air in the garage was thick and still, like the place itself was holding its breath. I was making my rounds when I saw him standing near the far end of level 3, just outside the glow of the flickering overhead light. He didn't move, didn't even shift his weight, just stood there, arms hanging at his sides, head tilted slightly, as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Garage is closed. You need to leave." No response. I took a step forward. I said, "You shouldn't be here, Robert." I froze. The way he said my name, it wasn't a question. He already knew who I was. I shined my flashlight directly at him. He didn't flinch. The man was tall, lean but not frail, dressed in a black coat that looked too heavy for the warm night. His face was pale, almost sickly, with sharp features that seemed stretched too thin over his skull. His eyes, they were wrong. Not cold, not angry, just too calm, like he was watching something play out exactly as he expected. I tightened my grip on my flashlight. "Who are you?" You've already started to feel it, haven't you? He said. His voice was low, steady. Too steady. The moments slipping. The memories that aren't yours. A cold pressure built in my chest. I didn't answer. He took a step closer. Tell me, he said. What did you do before this job? My throat went dry. Don't play games, I said. He smiled just barely. Try to remember. I opened my mouth to tell him I was a cop, that I had spent 7 years on the force before I left. But I hesitated, because suddenly, I couldn't remember why I left. I could recall the station, my old partner's name, the coffee shop I used to stop at before shifts, but the reason I quit? The last case I worked. Nothing. Like a piece of my life had been erased. The man nodded slowly, as if he could see the realization spreading through me. It's happening, he murmured. I took a step back, heart pounding. What the hell are you talking about? He tilted his head. Identity, synchronization, failure. The mind has trouble holding on to itself when exposed for too long. Some people lose fragments. Others dissolve completely. I swallowed hard. This wasn't real. This was just a vagrant, a crazy person, talking nonsense. But deep down, something in me knew he wasn't lying. Who are you? I asked again, my voice quieter this time. He smiled wider. David Renner. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. David Renner. I knew that name. Not from personal experience, but from a case file. A neuroscientist, once respected, then disgraced. Arrested for illegal human experiments. Memory manipulation, neurological conditioning. But that was years ago. David Renner was supposed to be in prison. My head swam. I don't understand, I said. You will, David whispered. Soon, you'll understand everything. Then the garage lights flickered and went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. And I wasn't alone. The silence in the parking garage wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of quiet you find late at night, when the world slows down and everything settles into a peaceful hush. This was something else. It was a watching kind of silence, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears like a presence I couldn't see. I stood in front of the security monitors, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk. The dim glow of the screens flickered against my face, casting shadows that danced on the walls. I watched myself on the grainy footage, walking through level 2, flashlight in hand. The problem was, I was sitting right here. My stomach twisted. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath fogging up the glass. The version of me on the monitor moved with purpose, sweeping his light across the garage, stopping now and then to check behind parked cars. He looked exactly like me. The same uniform, the same tired slouch in his shoulders. But I hadn't been down there. Not tonight. I checked the timestamps. The footage was live. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I grabbed my radio and pressed the button. Dispatch, are you seeing this? My voice came out more strained than I wanted. Static. Then a voice. Seeing what, Rob? I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? That I was watching myself on the security feed? That I had a double roaming the garage? My pulse pounded in my temples. I forced a swallow. Never mind, I said, setting the radio down with a shaky hand. On the screen, the other me stopped walking. He turned toward the camera, and then, slowly, he lifted a hand and waved. I jerked away from the monitor. My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I pushed back from the desk and strode toward the elevator, my boots echoing too loud in the empty garage. The elevator doors slid open, and I hesitated for just a second before stepping inside. My reflection stared back at me in the polished metal. Dark circles ringed my tired eyes. I looked like a man unraveling, and maybe I was. I pressed the button for level 2. The doors shut, and the elevator hummed as it descended. Something whispered behind me. I spun around. The elevator was empty. The numbers ticked down for 3, 2. The doors slid open, revealing the dim parking level. A single overhead light flickered, casting long, jerky shadows across the concrete. I stepped out, gripping my flashlight tighter. The air smelled stale, tinged with something metallic. The kind of smell that lingers in old buildings, thick with dust, and something else I couldn't name. A soft footstep echoed. I froze. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. Near the far corner, just past a row of parked cars, a figure stood half in the shadows. It was me. No, this wasn't happening. The other me stepped forward, out of the darkness, his face still hidden in the dim light. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. He took another step, and my breath caught in my throat. His uniform was identical to mine, right down to the security badge. He moved like me, with the same careful gait. But there was something off, something in the way he held himself, like he was wearing my body, but didn't quite know how to use it. Then he spoke. "Are you sure you're really you?" The voice was mine, but wrong. Too flat. Too hollow. A sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out my thoughts. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I took a step back. The other me took a step forward. I bolted. My boots pounded against the pavement as I ran toward the stairs. I didn't dare take the elevator. Not with him still in here. I reached the stairwell and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled for my radio. "Dispatch." I gasped. Something's in here with me. Something that looks like me. Silence. Then static. A voice crackled through. "Rob, you already reported that an hour ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. The radio slipped from my fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. I don't remember making it back to the security office. 1 second, I was standing in the stairwell, pulse hammering in my throat. The next, I was back in my chair, staring at the monitors. My hands were trembling. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. On the screen, the other me was gone. I looked down at my hands. For one terrifying moment, I wasn't sure if they were really mine. My head throbbed like a hammer against steel. The world around me flickered in and out, shapes bending, twisting, reforming. The cold concrete floor pressed against my cheek, rough and damp, as I struggled to open my eyes. My arms felt heavy, my legs refused to move. Something wasn't right. I tried to push myself up, but my wrists were strapped down. Thick leather restraints bit into my skin. My breathing quickened. The dim, flickering light overhead cast long shadows on the cracked walls of the hidden room. The stale air carried the sharp scent of metal and something sickly sweet, like old blood. David Renner stood over me, adjusting a tangled mess of wires connected to an ancient-looking monitor. His fingers moved with calm precision, twisting knobs, pressing buttons. He didn't even glance in my direction. "You're awake," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "Good. This part is better when you're awake." I yanked against the restraints. They didn't budge. My heart pounded harder. What the hell is this? My throat felt raw, my voice unsteady. David finally looked at me. His face, half lit by the cold blue glow of the screen, was disturbingly neutral. His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied me like I was an insect pinned to a table. "This," he said, gesturing at the wires, "is the final step." He pulled up a chair and sat beside me, elbows resting on his knees. "You've already felt it, haven't you? The gaps in time, the shifting memories, the feeling that something is wrong." He tilted his head. "You're not imagining it, Rob. You're experiencing the merge." The merge. That word sent a chill through me. I had read it in his journal, scrawled between pages of erratic notes and diagrams. Memory synchronization. Identity drift. Subjects lost to the merge. I clenched my fists. "Let me go." David sighed, shaking his head. "Why do you people always fight it?" He reached for a syringe on a nearby tray. A single drop of some thick, colorless liquid clung to the needle's tip. Panic surged through me. "Don't." He paused, as if considering my plea. Then he smirked. "You're already in it, Rob. You just don't know how deep." The monitor next to me flickered, and suddenly, the screen was filled with faces. Dozens of them. Men, women, old, young. Some stared blankly. Others screamed without sound. My pulse hammered as a horrible recognition crept over me. I knew them. Not from the real world, not from my life, but from my mind. They had been in my dreams, in my thoughts. Fragments of memories that didn't belong to me. David leaned closer, his voice low, almost whispering. "They were here before you, and now they're part of you." A deep nausea rolled through my stomach. "This is insane," I said, my voice shaking. This isn't real." David chuckled. "Reality is fragile, my friend. What you think is just electrical signals, a series of patterns. I've simply rearranged a few." I shook my head violently, trying to block out his words. "I don't believe you. You don't have to." He tapped the screen. They didn't either. Not at first. The faces shifted again. This time I saw myself. Me, walk in the garage. Me, sitting in the security office. Me, staring directly into the camera, eyes hollow. I stopped breathing. This is impossible, I whispered. David smiled. It's already happening. The restraints tightened as my body convulsed. A cold wave passed through me, like icy fingers clawing into my skull. The world around me blurred. I felt like I was slipping, like my own mind was peeling away. A voice rang through my head, overlapping with my own thoughts. A woman's voice. Anna. But who the hell was Anna? I saw flashes, memories that weren't mine. A child at home I'd never been in. A man's face, someone I'd never met, calling me his daughter. A hospital bed. A feeling of drowning. I gasped for air. My heart raced, trying to ground myself in my own reality. But I couldn't tell what that was anymore. David watched me, fascinated. You see, the merge is beautiful. It expands you, makes you more. He grinned. Or maybe it erases you. That's the fun part. I had to get out. I thrashed against the straps with everything I had, my body fueled by raw survival instinct. The chair creaked, metal bending. David reached for another switch, but I kicked out hard, knocking the tray of instruments to the floor. Syringes shattered. Wires sparked. The monitor glitched violently, the faces distorting. A horrible shrieking sound filled the room. Not from David, not from me, but from the machine itself. David lunged to fix it, his face twisting in panic. I saw my chance. I yanked free, my right wrist slipping from the now loosened strap. I grabbed the closest thing, a rusted metal clipboard, and slammed it against his head. David stumbled back, crashing into the control panel. Sparks flew. The machine screeched louder. The screen pulsed wildly, the faces inside writhing like they were trying to escape. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I staggered toward the exit, my legs weak, my head a storm of voices, memories, and static. Behind me, David screamed. Not in pain. In rage. You can't escape it, Rob. It's in you now. I didn't look back. I ran. My head was splitting apart. It wasn't just pain. It was something worse, something deeper. It felt like my thoughts were being pulled apart, stretched in different directions. Voices whispered inside my skull, their words half-formed, broken memories that weren't mine. I tried to move, but my wrists were strapped down. My arms ached from the struggle. I was sitting in an old chair, surrounded by flickering monitors and a mess of tangled wires. The air smelled like dust, metal, and something faintly burnt. David stood in front of me, adjusting knobs on his machine. His face was calm, almost peaceful, like he wasn't about to rip my mind apart. You're almost there, he said, tilting his head as he studied me. Do you feel it? The shift. I clenched my jaw. My own reflection stared back at me from one of the dark computer screens, but something was wrong. The man looking at me wasn't quite me. His eyes were just a little too wide. His mouth twitched when mine didn't. Panic clawed at my chest. I don't know what you did, I said, my voice hoarse, but I swear I'll... David shook his head. You still don't understand, do you? He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my face. I'm not doing anything to you. You're doing this to yourself. Your mind is trying to hold on to something that's already slipping away. He turned a dial. A sharp, electric buzz filled the air. The screens flickered, flashing images too fast to process. Faces, places, voices speaking in hushed tones. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as memories that weren't mine, flooded my brain. A woman laughing in a sunlit kitchen. A man crying in an empty hospital room. The cold sting of rain on a stranger's skin. I gasped, jerking against the restraints. Ooh, who are these people? My own voice sounded distant, disconnected. David smiled. They were here before you. Some of them are still here. Inside you. I thrashed against the chair. Get out of my head. David sighed, almost disappointed. It's too late for that, Robert. You're already part of the merge. No. I couldn't let this happen. I forced myself to breathe. Focus. The straps around my wrists were tight, but old. If I could just... I yanked my right arm forward as hard as I could, ignoring the sting of the leather digging into my skin. It didn't budge. David was still talking, lost in his own monologue about progress and evolution. His mistake. I twisted my wrist, grinding it against the buckle until the worn-out strap gave way. My right hand came free. I didn't think. I acted. I grabbed one of the loose metal rods from the machine's frame and swung. The metal connected with David's temple with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, knocking into a shelf of equipment. Glass shattered. Wires sparked. I ripped my other arm free and lunged for the machine's main console. Alarms blared as I tore out cables, smashing buttons, flipping every switch I could. The screens flickered violently, the faces warping and twisting into grotesque blurs. The room pulsed with a high-pitched whine. David's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" he shouted, scrambling to reach me. "You don't know what you're doing." I didn't care. I grabbed a heavy monitor and slammed it into the main processor unit. Sparks exploded. The air filled with the acrid stench of burning circuits. Then, something shifted. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world tilted. It felt like my body had been pulled in two different directions at once, like I was being peeled away from myself. I squeezed my eyes shut. My hands dug into the sides of my head. Then, silence. I opened my eyes. The machine was dead. The screens were black. The voices were gone. David was on the floor, staring at the wreckage, his face twisted in horror. His life's work destroyed. I didn't stick around. I ran. Through the dimly lit corridors of the garage, up the concrete stairwell, past the rows of empty cars that seemed to whisper my name. My legs burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because even as I reached the exit, even as I burst into the cold night air, I felt it, deep inside my skull. A presence. A whisper. Not David. Not me. Someone else. And they were still there. I quit the job the next morning. No 2-week notice, no explanation. I just left. I don't even remember driving home. One moment, I was standing outside the burning parking garage, smoke curling into the cold night sky. The next, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall, my duffel bag at my feet. My hands were shaking, my mind fogged over like I had just woken up from a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. I told myself that over and over. The garage was real. David was real. That machine, those voices, I didn't imagine any of it. And yet, something was wrong. The first thing I noticed was my reflection. I was in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to steady my breath. When I looked up, I saw myself in the mirror. Same tired eyes, same unshaven jaw. But for a brief, horrible second, my reflection didn't move with me. I turned my head. It turned a split second later. I blinked, and for that fraction of a moment, I saw someone else's face layered over mine. An older man, gaunt and pale, eyes wide with terror. I gasped and stumbled back, knocking over a bottle of mouthwash. When I looked again, it was just me. Just me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of things I didn't recognize, memories that didn't belong to me. A little girl crying in a dark room. A man in a hospital bed, wires strapped to his head. A woman whispering, "It's not real, it's not real," over and over until her voice faded into static. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. I didn't even remember falling asleep. The next few days passed in a haze. I avoided mirrors. I stayed inside, keeping the lights on even when I didn't need them. I told myself it was just trauma, just stress. My mind was playing tricks on me. But then I started recognizing people. Not in a normal way. I was at a gas station, paying for a cup of coffee, when I looked at the cashier and knew her name. I knew she had a younger brother. I knew she had once been afraid of drowning. She looked at me, waiting for me to take my change, and I realized I had never seen her before in my life. At the grocery store, I passed an old man in the cereal aisle and felt a pang of sorrow, so strong it nearly knocked me over. I knew his wife had died 5 years ago. I knew he still kept her favorite chair by the window, untouched, just waiting for her to come back. I didn't know how I knew. I stopped leaving my apartment after that. Then, the phone call came. It was late. I had been sitting on my couch, staring at the muted television, trying to keep my mind blank. When my phone rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." My voice sounded hollow. For a moment, there was only static. Then, beneath the crackle, a voice. My voice. "Are you sure you're really you?" The line went dead. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands were ice cold. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, that it was nothing. But deep down I knew. David's experiment never stopped. I was still inside it,